My fiancée refused to cut ties with her abusive ex, then chose him over me. Now, I'm picking up the pieces of my life. I'm 29 male, and up until about 6 months ago, I thought I had my life pretty much figured out. Good job, decent apartment, and most importantly, I was engaged to a woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. Let's call her Jay. Jay was everything I thought I wanted. She was smart, beautiful, ambitious, one of those people who lights up a room the second she walks in. We've been dating for about 3 years before I popped the question. Everything seemed perfect, like we were heading toward one of those fairy tale endings you see in movies. But life has a funny way of flipping things upside down when you least expect it. I guess looking back, there were red flags I ignored. I think I convinced myself that no relationship was without flaws, that we'd figure things out, and most of it was small stuff, until her ex came into the picture. Now Jay's ex wasn't just some random guy. Let's call him R. They dated on and off for years before I came into the picture, and from what I knew, the relationship was toxic as hell. Jay told me stories about how controlling and manipulative he was, how he'd gaslight her into thinking she was always in the wrong. I knew he'd cheated on her multiple times, and there were even hints of emotional and physical abuse. She painted a picture of a guy who was a walking red flag. So, imagine my surprise when, about a year into our engagement, Jay tells me she's still in contact with him. It started small, random texts, the occasional check-in. I asked her why she was still talking to him, given everything she'd told me about their history. She brushed it off, saying, I didn't like it, but I trusted her. I had to, right? She was my fiancée. But then things started escalating. I'd come home from work, and she'd be on the phone with him. At first, it was casual, but then I'd catch snippets of their conversations that made my stomach turn. He'd tell her how much he missed her, how he still loved her, how she was the only one who understood him. I confronted her about it multiple times, but she kept reassuring me, telling me that I had nothing to worry about, that I was her future, not him. But it didn't feel right. Something inside me was screaming that this wasn't normal. Why would someone want to keep ties with an abusive ex? Why couldn't she just cut him off like a bad habit? And then came the day that flipped everything. It was a Saturday, and we were supposed to meet some friends for brunch. I was getting ready when I noticed Jay hadn't left the bedroom in a while. I knocked on the door. No answer. When I opened it, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, tears running down her face. She looked up at me, and in that moment, I knew something was seriously wrong. He's outside, she whispered. I felt like my blood froze. I marched to the window, and sure enough, I was standing on the sidewalk, leaning against his car like he didn't have a care in the world. I turned back to Jay. Why the hell is he here? She couldn't even look at me. He needs to talk to me. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't just some random ex reaching out. He was showing up, here, at our place. I demanded she cut ties with him. Right then and there, I told her this was insane, that she was risking everything we had for some guy who treated her like garbage. And you know what she said? I can't. That was it. 3 years together, and she couldn't do the one thing I needed her to do. I told her, point blank, if she didn't cut him out of her life, I couldn't marry her. Her face crumbled, and she started begging, saying I was being unreasonable, that she loved me, not him. But she just couldn't let go because, well, she never gave me a straight answer. Something about not wanting to hurt him. Hurt him? What about me? What about us? I called off the wedding that night. I packed a bluff at the apartment, crashing at a buddy's place for a few days, while I figured out what the hell I was going to do next. My phone was blowing up with calls and texts from Jay, alternating between apologies, anger, and desperation. It was like she couldn't decide if she wanted to beg for my forgiveness or blame me for walking away. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I needed space. But space was the last thing I was going to get. About a week after I called things off, she started showing up at my workplace. At first, it was under the guise of just wanting to talk, but soon it became clear she was spiraling. She'd come into the office, all smiles at first, like nothing had happened, like we were still engaged and everything was fine. But when I'd pull her aside and tell her to leave, she'd break down in front of my coworkers, sobbing and pleading for me to take her back. It was humiliating. One time, she barged into a meeting I was having with my boss, of all people, and started accusing me of abandoning her, saying I was the one destroying our future, that I was overreacting. I can still remember the look on my boss' face, watching this scene unfold. As I tried to drag her out of the office, without making an even bigger scene, I had to start leaving work early or coming in late just to avoid her. I blocked her number, deleted her from all my social media, but it didn't stop. She'd find new ways to get in touch, burner numbers, fake accounts, even showing up at my buddy's place where I was staying, begging him to let her talk to me. Then, one day, I came home to find my car keyed. Deep, ugly scratches that made my stomach drop. I knew it was her. There was no one else who'd have a reason to pull something like that. But what really messed me up was the note she left on my windshield, scrawled in red marker. "You're making a mistake. We're meant to be." At that point, I started to get seriously worried. This wasn't just a jilted lover going through a breakup. This was obsession. She wasn't just refusing to move on. She was actively trying to pull me back by any means necessary. I filed for a restraining order. It wasn't easy. I didn't want things to get to that point, but I had no choice. My mental health was in the gutter. I was constantly on edge, looking over my shoulder, wondering when she was going to show up next. And then came the twist. I found out through a mutual friend that her ex was still very much in the picture, but not in the way I thought. Turns out he wasn't just some helpless, lovesick puppy trying to win Jay back. He was actively manipulating her, feeding her stories about how they were destined to be together, how I was the one keeping them apart, how she should do whatever it took to break us up. He even went as far as encouraging her to stalk me, to show up at my job, to cause chaos. The more I dug, the more I realized that Jay wasn't just holding on to an old relationship out of misguided loyalty. She was trapped in a psychological game with this guy. He had his claws so deep into her that she couldn't even see how toxic it was. And while part of me felt sorry for her, that sympathy evaporated the moment I found out she knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted both of us, me the stable, reliable guy who could give her the future she claimed to want, and the chaotic, abusive ex who made her feel needed in some sick, twisted way. She didn't want to choose, so she played both sides, thinking she could manipulate her way into keeping us both around. I confronted her one last time. She showed up at my work again, but this time I didn't avoid her. I met her outside and told her straight up that I knew what she was doing. I told her I knew about ours involvement, about how she was trying to play me, and that I was done. Really done. Her face went white. For a moment, I thought she might actually break down and admit it. But instead, she lashed out, screamed at me, called me every name in the book, told me I was a coward for running away, that I was just like every other guy who'd let her down. And you know what? I just stood there, calm as I could be, because in that moment I realized something. She wasn't the woman I thought she was. Maybe she never had been. Maybe I'd been so blinded by love, or whatever I thought love was, that I couldn't see the mess right in front of me. I walked away from her that day. For good. The restraining order eventually went through. She stopped showing up at my workplace, stopped blowing up my phone. I heard through the grapevine that she and her got back together. I'm not surprised. Honestly, they probably deserve each other. I moved on, but it's been a long road. There are days when I still feel the weight of everything that happened, still wonder how I didn't see the signs earlier. There are days when I still feel the weight of everything that happened, still wonder how I didn't see the signs earlier. It's strange how blind love can make you. I spent so much time focusing on the good parts of Jay, the parts that made me happy, that I completely ignored the cracks in our foundation. I was building a life with someone who was still tangled in a web of toxicity, someone who couldn't let go of her past, no matter how destructive it was. After I got the restraining order, things slowly started to settle. The chaos died down, but the emotional wreckage stuck around for a while. I spent months picking up the pieces, trying to figure out what was real in our relationship and what was just manipulation. Trust wasn't something that came easy to me anymore. It was like I had to relearn how to live without constantly looking over my shoulder, without wondering if she or I would pop back into my life. But over time, I did move on. I started focusing on myself, my job, my friends, the things that made me feel like me again. I won't lie, dating again has been tough. Every time I meet someone new, there's this nagging voice in the back of my head, warning me to be careful, to not get too close too fast. But I've learned from it. I've learned to set boundaries, to trust my gut when something feels off, and to never ignore the red flags, no matter how small. Jay, I heard through mutual friends that she's still with her. Honestly, I don't care. I hope, for her sake, she finds a way out of that mess someday. But that's not my responsibility anymore. I can't fix her. I spent too long thinking I could, and all it did was destroy the future I thought I had. She made her choices, and I made mine. I walked away, and I've never looked back. If you've made it this far, thanks for sticking around. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them, so please leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this one.